In 1872, a young assistant at the British Museum was translating clay tablets from an ancient Mesopotamian library. The tablets were thousands of years old, remnants of a civilization long vanished. As he worked through the cuneiform symbols, he suddenly froze. He had just read a flood story, a divine warning, a chosen survivor, a massive boat, animals gathered to be saved, a great deluge that drowned the entire world. The tablet predated the Bible by more than 1,000 years, and here is where it becomes truly unsettling. That Mesopotamian account was just one. As archaeologists and anthropologists spread across the globe, they kept finding the same story. In India, in China, in the Americas, in Aboriginal Australia, in the Pacific Islands, in ancient Greece, in West Africa. More than 500 distinct cultures. Every inhabited continent, one story. A coincidence or evidence of something far stranger? The oldest known written flood narrative comes from Mesopotamia. The Epic of Gilgamesh, carved into clay tablets nearly 4,000 years ago. The gods grow tired of humanity and decide to wipe it out. One god secretly warns a man named Utnapishtim. Build a boat, exact dimensions, load your family, gather every species of animal. The flood lasts 7 days. Mountains vanish. The boat comes to rest on a mountain peak. Utnapishtim releases birds, a dove, a swallow, a raven, to find dry land. When the raven doesn't return, he knows the waters have receded. He offers a sacrifice. The gods smell the sweet aroma. If this sounds exactly like Noah's Ark, there's a reason. But this story was circulating 1,000 years before Genesis was written, and Mesopotamia was only the beginning. Travel east, into ancient India. The Shatapatha Brahmana, composed 3,000 years ago, tells of a sage named Manu. He is warned, not by a god, but by a fish. A tiny fish that speaks. It tells him a catastrophic deluge is coming. Build a boat. Gather the seeds of all living things. When the flood comes, the fish, now enormous, will guide your vessel to a mountain peak. Move further east, into China. The Yellow River overflows. Floodwaters stretch to the horizon. A legendary figure named Yu the Great doesn't fight the water. He redirects it, carving channels for 13 years until the flood subsides. The flood becomes the founding event of the Xia dynasty. Civilization itself is born from the deluge. 3 civilizations, 3 continents, no known contact, 1 structure, warning, survivor, vessel, mountain, restart. And then the pattern becomes impossible to dismiss. When Europeans crossed the Atlantic, they carried the biblical flood story with them. But when they arrived in the Americas, the people there already had their own. The Aztecs told of a flood that destroyed the Fourth World. A man named Coxcox and his wife survived in a hollowed-out cypress log. The Quiché Maya, in the Popol Vuh, described a flood sent to destroy an imperfect first creation. The Inca spoke of a flood rising from Lake Titicaca. 1 man, 1 woman, warned in advance, saved in a boat. The Hopi of the American Southwest describe a series of worlds destroyed by floods, each one cleansing the earth. The Ojibwe tell of a great serpent that caused the waters to rise, with survivors escaping in a canoe guided by a turtle that grew into an island. Move to Africa. The Maasai describe a flood that destroyed everything except 1 righteous man and his family. The Yoruba tell of the god Olokun flooding the world in a rage. The Kikuyu of Kenya, a flood, a handful of survivors, a restart. In Aboriginal Australian traditions, some of the oldest continuous oral traditions on Earth, there are flood narratives connected to the rainbow serpent, describing catastrophic floods that reshaped the coastline. And in the Pacific, across islands separated by thousands of miles of open ocean, the Maori, the Hawaiians, the Samoans all carry flood traditions. There is no ancient trade route connecting the Sumerians to the Hopi. No missionary reached the Maya before the Spanish. No book traveled from Mesopotamia to the Australian outback. Yet the same story appears everywhere. So what is actually happening here? If these were just generic flood stories, the similarities could be dismissed. Floods happen, rivers overflow, people tell disaster stories, but the details don't add up. Consider what these 500 cultures share. 1. A divine warning. Someone is told in advance, across Mesopotamia, India, the Americas, not after, before. 2. A chosen survivor, not a king, not a warrior, an ordinary person selected to preserve life. 3. A constructed vessel, not swimming to high ground, a deliberate boat, often built to exact specifications. 4. Animals saved, not just the survivor's family, the preservation of species, the seed bank of the living world. 5. A mountain resting place. The vessel comes to rest on a mountain peak, even in cultures with no nearby mountains. 6. Birds sent to find land, the dove, the raven, the swallow, independent cultures using the identical technique. 7. A sacrifice afterward. The flood ends. The survivor emerges. The first act is gratitude. The odds that 500 unrelated cultures independently invented a story with 7 matching specific elements are astronomically low. So if it's not coincidence, what is it? There is no single accepted explanation. But the theories fall into 4 camps, and each raises more questions than it answers. Theory 1. A shared memory of a real event. At the end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, sea levels rose dramatically as the ice sheets melted. Coastal civilizations were drowned. The survivors told the story. Their descendants carried it across the continents. The Black Sea flood hypothesis suggests a catastrophic inundation around 5600 BCE. Mediterranean waters breached the Bosporus and flooded a massive freshwater lake. Villages were submerged in days. The trauma of that event may have seeded the flood stories of the ancient Near East. But this only explains one region. It doesn't explain highland Peru, the Australian outback, or the Pacific Islands. Theory 2. Cultural diffusion. Perhaps the story spread from a single source, passed from civilization to civilization along ancient trade routes. Stories travel. The Epic of Gilgamesh influenced later Near Eastern cultures. Traders carried ideas across continents. Polynesian navigators spread oral traditions across the Pacific. But the timeline doesn't work. Flood stories in the Americas predate any known contact with Mesopotamian cultures. Aboriginal Australian traditions may be tens of thousands of years old. Theory 3. A lost civilization. What if all these flood myths preserve the memory of a real advanced civilization that existed before the last ice age ended? A precursor culture erased by rising seas, remembered only in the stories its survivors carried to every corner of the earth. Proponents point to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built over 11,000 years ago by people who were supposedly hunter-gatherers. They point to underwater structures off the coasts of Japan, Cuba, and India. Mainstream archaeology rejects this firmly. There is no verified evidence of a lost global civilization. And yet, 500 cultures telling the same story doesn't prove the theory correct, but it also doesn't make the mystery disappear. Theory 4. It's just a flood story. The skeptical view: floods are the most common natural disaster. Every ancient civilization lived near water. Sooner or later, every civilization suffered a devastating flood. They all told stories about it. This explanation is clean and rational, but it doesn't explain the birds, or the boat dimensions, or the divine warning. These are not generic flood experiences. These are specific narrative elements appearing in culture after culture across the entire planet. Perhaps the answer isn't about geology or archaeology at all. Every human civilization that has ever existed has looked at the world and asked the same questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What came before us? The flood story is not just about water. It's about endings and beginnings. It's about the terrifying knowledge that civilizations can be erased. It's about the fragile hope that something, someone, survives. Maybe the flood myth is universal, not because it records a single historical event, but because it records a single human truth. The world is older than us. Forces bigger than us have shaped it. Everything we build can be washed away. The Sumerians knew this. The Maya knew this. The ancient Chinese knew this. And perhaps that's why their stories, separated by oceans and millennia, all sound the same. They were telling us what they learned. So did a global flood actually happen? Did a lost civilization perish beneath rising seas? Or do 500 cultures share the same story because they share the same fears, the same hopes, the same questions? The truth is, we don't know. No single theory fully satisfies. But perhaps the mystery itself is the point. Because the fact that cultures from Mesopotamia to Mexico, from India to the islands of the Pacific, from the Arctic to the Australian desert, all looked at the world and told the same story, is itself a remarkable thing. 500 cultures, one flood, one impossible coincidence, because every mystery has a story. This is Tales Unknown.